we've been learning from each other, and I think we all learned a great deal in the last 48 hours, or less than 48 hours. So let's sustain it and make it last. I've been asked to do some observations and reflections on what I come away with. The science of optics tells us that what you see depends on the angle of reflection. And by the way, I hope that the angle of reflection off of my head is not blinding any of you, because that's a very bright light in front of me. And my angle of reflection and my perspective is, as a historian, to look at the past, and that means past decades and the past few days, so we can do better in the future. Why was, to coin a phrase, why is this night, why was this conference different than other conferences in the past? And let me talk of a few of them. There were genetic engineering geneticist meetings in the 1960s where the deep concerns about the anticipatory concerns about the implications of this research before it was possible to do genetic engineering were troubling to the geneticists and among themselves, and sometimes on the programs of the meetings. They discussed these issues of they knew it was going in a certain direction, they were taking it there. They asked, when should we draw the line, and where should we draw the line? And they had in mind the experience of the nuclear physicists, who they regarded in their reading of history as having talked about these issues when it was too late. They were concerned about the consequences of their research before they were doing, before the research had paid off. That was in the late 60s, and that caught on in the press. There were editorials, and very soon some of the leading geneticists who were raising these issues began to worry that public reaction would be overreaction and would jeopardize their funding. So they sought to reassure the public, the media, and Congress, which had asked for a technology assessment of this, to not worry, that this is so far in the distant future that you needn't worry about it now. And furthermore, we need more funding to bring cures for cancer and other dread diseases. And that's what our research is really about. So the future came about in just a few years. In the early 1970s, the recombinant DNA techniques made it possible. The famous Asilomar Conference to consider this and to devise ways to self-regulate, to contain themselves and their techniques so that no harm would be done and the public would not get alarmed, nor would Congress intervene with regulations. That was the basic purpose of it, and the fear of the individuals involved in that conference was of the public knowing about this, of getting the wrong idea, and of getting into, quote, the affairs of science. By the way, there's historical documentation of this in the wonderful website for this meeting, for two particular articles that can talk about this period. So what's different about, I guess we can call it Tarrytown I? Well, we've been living with these consequences of genetic engineering for quite a while now. Most of us here are working with them on a wide range of issues with great on-the-ground experience to bring to it, except that we're seeking better, alternate ways of creating knowledge and technologies that, for many of us, are based on social justice and community. And also the differences include the participation. The participants in Tarrytown I are, with a few notable exceptions, like Stuart Newman and Alex, are not from the labs, but from other disciplines, including the one called social activism. This group is younger, most of us, excluding myself and a few other oldies, are younger, and the group is certainly more diverse. Just look around the room. Another difference in this meeting and in the earlier ones is the context. In the 1960s and the early 70s, it was the anti-Vietnam War movement, the civil rights movement, the women's movement, the environmental movement, lots of things in motion and in play, and scientists themselves reflected that context by asking social responsibility questions within their own fields. Now the context is, among other things, enduring war, an almost total commercialization of academic biology, powerful industry lobbies with government blessings. All of this influences the questions scientists ask about the implications of their work, and the scientific questions they ask, and the values they associate with the answers that they think are the correct ones. In the earlier period, the audiences were legislators, the media, and this public that was very fearful to many. They wanted to influence them that the genetic engineers, the new genetic engineers, could handle these issues on their own, and they stressed the benefits and not the risks. And they devised a framework, a self-regulating framework, but with the NIH enforcing it, to contain the risks. They downplayed the risks. Now the audience is initially us for this first conference, and I'd like to just comment briefly on that, of what prevents people from getting involved in these issues. You know the phrase, well, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand it. But generally, people think that this is complex, that inaccessible, arcane knowledge. And the way to overcome that is not to think that it's our job or scientists' job to inform the public, but to listen to them, to learn from them, to make it a two-way street. There's the emphasis on scientific literacy. If only we had that, people could participate more. Well, then, in that case, there should be a two-way literacy. Scientists should have public literacy so that they understand the needs, the processes by which science is done and supported and applied in society. The other thing that I think is very important is in this education, is to influence science education by introducing into the curriculum the reality of science, the reality of doing science, and not to separate the ethical issues and the political context, and to defer those until later when you really know how to do the science. Science is not any different than, it's not any more separable from politics than the strands of DNA themselves. There won't be time to talk about what could be done, but I'd love to see more discussion. These are the things that we didn't have time for in this program. More discussion of what can be done to influence the curriculum, to provide alternatives for scientists who define their careers in broader ways, and in particular to reach young students of science and work with them to achieve this. Another thing I think that I heard people say, if not directly, to indicate that fact-finding is very important. We need information on statistics regarding funding, conflict of interest, harm already done, positive results in terms of regulation and social usefulness, social needs not fulfilled. We know that information. I think it needs to be done systematically. One way is through case studies of the lost battles and the victories of resistance, of positive change. For example, the propositions in California, those struggles, the achievement in Congress of the Genetic Discrimination Act, our recombinant DNA regulation, such as it is and has evolved, to analyze that, to have the histories of how that came to be so that we can learn from it and we can apply it in the future. Another thing we need is to bring in the word biological weapons. This has been a major consequence of the new techniques. And if that is not human genetic engineering and effects on humans, we really need to talk about that a lot more. Finally, another thing that's really missing besides these narratives and histories and fact-finding, I'd love to see at these meetings some more cultural contributions in the arts and film. We had the beginning of that, and that was fascinating. We're missing those dimensions, and in every other political movement and every part of social change, artists have reacted. Are they going to react by showing a glowing rabbit as a piece of installation art? That might have some political effect, but what about what people like Nancy Spiro and Leon Golub and others did during the Vietnam War? Enormous murals, good art in museums now, some of that, which reflected the spirit of the time and helped people think in a new way. Let's find ways to continue all of this and to communicate about these issues so we can keep up the momentum. Thanks.